My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverses. Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And then all kinds of really weird things happen. That's my mini pitch for Adventure Time.
So, Beeper, we have not really talked about movie trailers that have come out, so I thought it'd be just fun to do a quick hitter on some of the most recent trailers. Assuming you've seen them. But anyway, have you seen the trailer for Venom, Let There Be Carnage?
Yes, I have. And also my wife made me watch the first Venom because that trailer came out. It looks like it's going to be... Actually, it looks like it has this thing where it looks like it took the first Venom movie and is like, oh, people like this, and they might have just invested a little bit too much into what people liked in it. So I feel like it's
the whole kind of like buddy comedy element of like Eddie and Venom.
Like, I don't know, Mjolnir had a good description for it. It looks like it's going to be a swing, and she'd rather a swing and a miss than a movie that didn't try at all. And I mean, Woody Harrelson is always fun, and his hair isn't as terrifyingly weird and disgusting as it was in the like one clip he was in at the beginning of the first movie.
At the end of the first movie.
End, yes, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before. I'm just the fact that we're gonna get a Carnage character in a movie without Spider-Man it's just like, and even though he's red, he looks different, but it's like at the end of the day, it's two very similar looking characters fighting each other. Yeah. Probably mostly at night to save money on the budget.
And I mean, we already got a little bit of that in the first movie, and it wasn't great. Like, the fight scene, you know, not
riot. Yeah, it was
not. The one fight scene at the end, it was at night, it was dark, and it was meh at best.
Yeah, so anyway, I would agree with Mjolnir. At least they're trying something. And the fact that Andy Serkis is the director, it kind of like makes me hope that it'll be creative and perhaps they'll be able to do something with like, you know, lean into his experience with motion capture performance.
He can do other things, right?
Yes, I know. But in this situation where you got these characters who are mostly CG that are like principal parts of the story, I can hope that his experience can like lend something to Tom Hardy and Woody Harrelson and whoever else has to, you know, act with a bunch of CG stuff.
And Tom Hardy and Woody Harrelson. Is it Woody Harrelson who's voicing Carnage?
It's the voices sound so modulated, it's hard to tell. Apparently that's supposed to be Tom Hardy's voice, like doing the Venom stuff.
Yeah, that's why I was asking, because I heard that. I did not notice it during the movie. I was told specifically that he voiced both of them.
Yeah. Eternals also had its first trailer. I'm assuming Mjolnir had you watch that one?
It's Marvel. I have seen it. So yes, it gave me weird Game of Thrones flashback because there's like 3 actors from Game of Thrones in it. And apparently Kit Harington is playing a character that Jon Snow was partially based off of. So that'll be really weird. I don't know.
They're getting to the point now where they're adapting Marvel properties that I know absolutely nothing about. Like I had someone today ask me, "Oh, like tell me about Eternals," and I'm like, "You know about as much as I do." Like you Googled it yesterday.
We'll cover it on the podcast eventually, and until then, I won't do research.
Well, and honestly, like even with Guardians of the Galaxy, like I had never ever heard of that before they announced it as a movie, and I kind of went into the movie blind without having read a single comic, and after the fact, learning how loose an adaptation of the comics it was, I'm like, maybe it's for the best that I just don't look into the comics. I know that people are like already discussing it because it kind of makes it clear that like, oh, they've been on Earth all this time and they've never interfered with human history. And so this question was like, well, why didn't they get involved when Thanos came along or when any of these other threats came along?
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's the eternal problem of the MCU. Like, it sounds like they've got a plot device that explains why they haven't and why they will this time, and it will be personal to them. Which I hope so, because I feel like if they do make it another world-ending thing, it might be dangerous. But if they keep to the Spider-Man thing, where it's something personal and specific to them, and they have to deal with it, or it's like the X-Men, it's a mutant thing, so we have to take care of it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll end up seeing it. The trailer didn't do anything to get me super excited, though. I'm like, okay, they look nice in their outfits.
Yeah, I was mostly distracted by the fact that 3 of the actors are Game of Thrones actors, and they're playing somewhat period piece thing, kind of, and it's like, this is weird.
So speaking of Spider-Man, it was announced this week that the lead has been cast for the Kraven the Hunter movie that's being made.
Oh, okay. I like that character though. So, like, I don't know. I know how you feel about them doing weird spin-offs of like characters that Sony still have the rights to, but that's a good character.
But he's a Spider-Man villain, and Spider-Man's not going to be in this movie.
Yes, you're right, and it probably won't work, but they could have picked something worse.
And okay, so it's coming out in January 2023 right now. And they've cast Aaron Taylor Johnson to play Kraven the Hunter.
I have no idea who that is.
He's the MCU Quicksilver. He played Kick-Ass. He was in the 2014 Godzilla movie.
Oh, okay. Really?
Yep.
I don't know. That's a role that I don't... Come on, that's a character that was written with, like, the Schwarzenegger, 80s badass...
Well, we know he can do a European accent thanks to the MCU.
No. I don't know, I feel like it's not gonna work if they don't have, like, a buff dude playing him. Like, not just, actor who works... not like Henry Cavill, but like beyond that, like real bodybuilder, big guy, Dave Bautista, The Rock, that kind of a frame. I mean, I'm not saying that you need to have that frame, but like it is kind of a big thing for him that he is like physically imposing. It's part of his persona, right? Like, I'm not crazy, right?
No, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
To you, like it is kind of a weird thing.
Maybe this is a prequel to like show him who he was before he was the big game hunter, and maybe he'll encounter some kind of drug that gives him bigger muscles.
No, but then we've got the Bane and Batman 89, or sorry, Batman and Robin problem.
Yeah. I mean,
we're better at CG, but there's the...
It's like how the Morbius movie is like, I guess, showing us the origin of Morbius. I could see this being like kind of like setting up perhaps Kraven Hunter's story so that when he doesn't cross paths with some Spider-Man type thing.
Yeah.
Because he is supposed to be like a hunter, right? Like a person who hunts animals, and they're not necessarily in the public consciousness. They're not necessarily like held up as heroes. So to try and make him the protagonist of a movie, I'm like, how are you going to do that without like upsetting some people?
I don't think you can. It's like, I don't know. They might give him...
Like his outfit is literally like a lion head.
But that's the thing. They might try to give him like a tribal feel to him, which is going to have a different kind of backlash. I don't know. I hope that we get uh, um, a J. Jameson cameo in it, though. Like that, I hope the movie ends with him getting hired to catch or to find Spider. You know what I mean? Like, I hope that's at least in there.
Yeah, I mean,
And I
we're
hope
not
J.K.
sure.
Simmons does it.
Yeah, we're not sure if this is set in the MCU. It's kind of ambiguous. Same as Morbius and even Venom. Like, they could tie it in, but from what I understand, they're supposed to be their own separate thing. But it would be cool, like, yeah, if it ended with like the scene from Far From Home where Jameson like is like Spider-Man's a menace and Peter Parker, blah blah blah.
And I mean, like, I don't know. Look, the Snyder Cut ended with a sequel bait that's never gonna happen, hopefully. But like, that wasn't supposed to happen, so why not just throw that in?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we also have some Dooms delays, but in two of these three cases, they're actually like advancing the release date earlier, which is, I don't know, probably a good sign. Maybe not. Like, there's a sequel to The Boss Baby coming out called The Boss Baby: Family Business. It was supposed to come out in September, but it's now coming out July 2nd.
Okay. I mean, what am I? It's a Boss Baby. The Boss Baby was a weird movie.
I never even saw
Weird
it. So.
premise. It did not work. Like, the premise would have been really hard to execute properly, and it did not, and so it's just horrible as opposed to being possibly something that could be entertaining. I was really excited, um, you know, to see Alec Baldwin be a baby, but then it's like, no, the whole movie didn't work.
But it is a good sign, right? Like the fact that studios are pushing the release dates farther up to like say like they're, I don't know, that either that these are like sacrificial lambs they're being like offered up to the slaughter, or that there's signs that there's more people going back to the movies, and so it's
Probably, I don't know. It's I think it is part of like a general optimism, but also I think that eh,
I mean our
you
our
know, if
Clifford
Boss Baby gets thrown to the wolves and doesn't make too much money, who cares?
well our Clifford the Big Red Dog live action movie, it's now coming out. It was supposed to come out November 5th. It's now coming out September 17th. So we're getting that one a good 2 months early.
All right, that one is definitely a sacrificial lamb. They know they can't make money, and they're just like, okay, you know what? Let's blame it on the pandemic while we still can.
Well, you know, we don't know that for sure. I mean, this might be a great movie. I can't
You
even
tried
get.
saying that. You tried saying that.
Yeah. And then the only real delay that's of relevance to us, there's an untitled Marvel movie that's been delayed from November 3rd, 2023 to November 10th, 2023.
Ooh.
It's like the first one that doesn't have like an actual title attached to it. So of the movies that have been announced, like Guardians 3 is supposed to come out in summer 2023. And then there's like 3 different movies that have been announced that haven't been given a release date, and that include the Fantastic Four movie they're making, Blade, and Captain America 4. So
Oh man.
if you were Marvel and you know you wanted to like mix it up after putting out Guardians, what would you pick among those 3?
Blade. I think that putting Fantastic Four close to Guardian would be very dangerous.
Mm.
Maybe Captain America if you want to try to ride the hype a little bit, but it's going to have died down for like for the Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Snowy Owl.
Yeah, Snowy Owl. Like, I feel like the hype will have died down by that time, so I don't know, maybe that one, but definitely not Fantastic Four. Because if the third Guardian movie is any good, and even if it's bad, it's still probably going to be compared to the Fantastic Four, and they really don't want that. The Fantastic Four already has a lot riding against it. I feel like putting it near another space-based thing is not going to be great.
I would agree, and I think it's a good pattern to go. It's like introduce a new thing, come back to something you already know, like going back and forth. So if they're gonna have Guardians, it would make sense to do a new thing, and Blade would definitely be like different and new at that point.
And like, yeah, people are going to compare it to Wesley Snipes, but it's Wesley Snipes, so
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we've had how many versions of Spider-Man? Daredevil's been on screen in 2 different iterations. Ghost Rider's been around a couple. Like, I think people are pretty understanding the fact that there are multiple versions of comic book characters in things. So,
oh yeah, no, I think it's less so for that, but more it will be compared to his performance. But if it's compared to the Blade trilogy, then it'll do fine. If it's compared to the first one, it might have to actually get some things right.
totally. So now we can start talking about today's topic, Adventure Time.
Come on, bring a friend. We'll go to a very distant land. Wait, sorry, I gotta keep that.
I'm just gonna. I'll actually just play the intro, so you don't have to like sing it for us unless you like really feel passionate about it. But
I was actually gonna pause and wait till you asked me to give you the DVD cover and just sing that.
Let's just do some secret origin segment here. So, how were you first introduced to this franchise?
All right. In the dark days of the internet, when YouTube was very young and still not owned by Google, there was a video which was the failed pilot to an animated TV show that was pitched to Cartoon Network, and it was called Adventure Time. And my friends and I watched the crap out of it, and it was hilarious. And it had this young boy with his friend the dog, Jake the dog and Finn the human. It had Princess Bubblegum. It had the rainicorn. She didn't speak Korean. She just kind of like went. It was great. Abraham Lincoln was the king of Mars, but in the past, I think, because his mind was transported back in time and in space. The Ice King was there, and it was great. And it was just such a weird thing and hilarious. And we watched it a lot, my friends and I. My entire friend group and I. And then one day I heard that they were actually making a TV show, and I refused to believe it until it happened. And I was like, okay, this is here. It exists. I must watch it. And then I watched it, and it was great. And also, I'm just going to add this. I know she's not here because homework, but Mjolnir first watched this show because I introduced it to her. It's the first show we watched completely together. We were just friends when we started it, and we were engaged by the time we ended it.
So this show aired from 2010 to 2018. Are you telling me that you actually watched it during its entirety of its run?
Intermittently, yes. I never watched it regularly as it was. No, I did actually watch 1 or 2 of the seasons as they were coming out. But I did watch all of it, and I watched the last season within a year of its release because it was being released during the last season was coming out as I was working at a summer camp where I couldn't get internet.
So is it fair to say you're a fan of this series?
Absolutely. I love it. It's great.
Okay. So
I think it's great, but also I think before we talk about it too objectively, it is also it was a precursor to a lot of things to happen. I don't think that things like Steven Universe or even Rick and Morty would have been able to have the same clot and the same ability to be made if Adventure Time hadn't paved the way for that kind of off-brand weirdish thing.
Yeah, I can't remember when I would have first been exposed to Adventure Time. I just have these random memories. I remember I had a housemate who had a version
coming out when we lived together, right?
Probably, yeah. And I can recall you and others we were living with watching it. I remember one of our housemates had a version of the card game Munchkin that was modeled after Adventure Time. So my introduction to a lot of Adventure Time characters was just their card art on the game Munchkin. And I remember asking, who is this, or what's their deal, or why is there a gender bent version of this character? And it was,
to be fair, gender bending is inherently a part of Munchkins as well.
Okay, I did not know that, but the point is, I didn't actually watch the show. I just saw pictures of a bunch of the characters and had people explain to me. I can also distinctly remember when I was going through my brony phase that one of my brothers was trying to convince me that I should watch Adventure Time instead, because he was like, all the reasons you're enjoying this My Little Pony show, like Adventure Time does the same thing but better. So we had this like thing where like, all right, I'll sit through an episode of Adventure Time if you sit through an episode of My Little Pony. And in the end of it, like neither of us really started watching the other show. And then beyond those two pieces of trivia, I think it was popular enough that, I followed John DiMaggio's career fairly well. He was in a documentary in 2013 called I Know That Voice, and he kind of highlighted his work with Adventure Time in that. And of course I recognized his voice from other roles he's played. But yeah, it was something that was always there, and it just never pulled me in. And obviously was popular, and I think the thing that stands out to me the most as ever I think about is that Bacon Pancakes song. And I'm not even sure what the context is. I just know it became like viral, and people like were singing it to me, and it was like,
They were
okay, I
just
guess.
making bacon pancakes.
Yeah,
It was literally just Jake is singing it while making breakfast in one episode. It has no more bearing or meaning to it.
Yeah. So I literally, even this past week trying to do research, it's not available on any streaming services in Canada. It is available on HBO Max if you're in the United States, but in Canada, it really it's not easy to find unless you actually buy the show from either DVD, Blu-ray, or digital copy. So I did watch a lot of YouTube videos about Adventure Time, and I think I made a mistake because the first one I watched was a timeline of the Adventure Time universe, and I just couldn't believe how complex it was. And I realized a lot of the details that are in this timeline video were like revealed like towards the end of the series. But
also a lot of it is, and this is something I love about Adventure Time, a lot of it is done very subtly.
Yeah,
like,
it was pretty
it's a show
complicated.
that very seldom hits you over the head with exposition. It just has a lot of things, and you're like, oh, yeah, this was in one episode, but it actually has a bearing on the cosmic relevance of the entire show.
Yeah, so now let's get into the secret origin of the actual series. So it ran for 10 seasons from 2010 to 2018. And over that period, they produced 283 episodes. Now, bear in mind that the actual episodes were like half length for animation, so they're like 11 minutes. So if you were thinking of like watching it as a half-hour show, there'd be like 2 different episodes in each half hour.
Makes it super bingeable, though.
Yeah, so if you take that 283 and you cut it in half, that's like 150 something like full-length episodes. It's still a very impressive run for, like, I feel like there's not many animated shows in this era that get that many episodes, so it speaks to how popular it was, except when it was first introduced. So I want to just provide some points of correction to what you shared earlier. The original pilot that you would have watched over and over again on YouTube was first created as a 6-minute short for this segment on Nickelodeon called Random Cartoons. And Random Cartoons was this essentially the show where they would play a bunch of like 6 or 7 minute shorts, and it was a way for the studio to try and like see what would be a good idea to turn into an actual show.
So it was a pilot.
It was a pilot, basically, yeah. Like this, and this is a trend Nickelodeon has done in the past. Like a lot of shows from the previous iteration of their, like the Fairly Odd Parents or My Life as a Teenage Robot, a lot of these shows started out as like one-off skits in one of these kind of like compilation shows. And so yeah, the original 6-minute pilot for Adventure Time was ran in this Nickelodeon thing, and it ended up becoming viral. It got like 3 million views when it was uploaded online, and it seemed very popular, but for whatever reason Nickelodeon passed on making it into a series twice.
Bet they're kicking themselves now. Well, yes and no. I mean, I think because I always found it weird the amount of kids who watch this show. Like it's a kid-friendly show, but it isn't really a kids show either. Like there are some remarkably dark, not just imagery but also themes in that show, and I think like because it was picked up originally by Adult Swim, right?
So it was picked up for Cartoon Network, so not for Adult Swim, but Adult Swim like airs on Cartoon Network, but in like in the evenings, and this would have aired during its more like regular time slots.
Which really, Oh, I thought it was. Yeah, I thought it started off on Adult Swim because because it isn't really that kiddish.
Yeah, and this is something we've seen on this show many times before, where you know, a real something that turned into something amazing and great and like famous and popular was like rejected by decision makers, and it just again it perpetuates this idea that people in leadership positions can't see the future. They might have an idea about what will become popular and successful, but you know, a lot of things end up being passed from one studio to another, and this is another instance of that. So it was Cartoon Network who I guess saw the potential for Adventure Time, and I don't know how the rights work because like it was made to air on Nickelodeon, like the pilot, but somehow the creator of the series, Pendleton Ward, was able to sell the idea to Cartoon Network, and so it became a series on that network. And I'm glad you brought up the ambiguity of its audience, but before we dive into that, yeah, just get the Blu-ray case description out of the way.
Adventure time! Come on, grab your friends. We'll go to very distant lands. We'll take the dog and then the human. The fun will never end. It's adventure time.
So you can start talking whenever.
Yeah, I just thought of something that kind of it weirdly bittersweet. The fun did eventually end because the series ended and had kind of a good wrap up where some things changed and some others didn't. But like, if we want to give a bit more of a background, see, the thing is, I feel like this wouldn't be on a Blu-ray case, but like it. So maybe we should just talk about it later. But I feel like it has, like, yes, it's fun, it's quirky, exactly as the intro says, but also, prepare to also have really weirdly deep feelings come with these fun, colorful adventures, and also some cosmic horror because yeah, there's definitely some of that going on there too.
Yeah, so thankfully Cartoon Network has uploaded like several like sections of episodes onto YouTube. So I watched some of those, and my housemate came in. I said, "Oh yeah, this is a show we're reviewing. It's a it's a kids show," and he was like, "Really? This is for kids?" And it did seem very odd. Like it's kind of weird in the sense of like it's super colorful. Like there's candy, people made out of candy, and there's all this like super imaginative stuff happening on screen. But then it's very like
Candy
you'd almost
people
swear,
will eat candy.
yeah, you'd almost swear it was made for adults.
Yeah, no, it definitely was. Like, it's passable for children, but even they're not young children. Like, I would not, I remember when I was babysitting my cousins and they were like 10 and 12 and like, yeah, we're gonna watch Adventure Time. And I was like, okay, 12-year-old, yes, 10-year-old, man, I'm not even sure about that. Like, it's more of a preteen show than a kids show. Like, and not in the sense that it's like peppy and like, tween oriented, but like that's the minimum level of maturity you really, I think, would need to not panic a little bit when watching some of it,
Yeah, like
but also to get the complexity of some of the characters.
yeah, like from what I've heard people say on YouTube, the series starts out very episodic, very kind of like just, oh, if we're going on fun adventures and we're meeting all these weird characters and there's lots of jokes and fart jokes, and it seems
Yeah.
like it's much more kid friendly in the beginning. And then as the series goes on, they start introducing more side characters who get the focus. They start telling more complicated stories. They start diving into like the characters' backstories more. You start to see more and more of the world in which they live. They start
And the
asking
more
like
you see of
philosophical
it,
questions.
yeah, the more you see of it, the more you realize it is definitely not an idyllic, fun world, especially the Candy Kingdom, which is actually like a ruthless dictatorship with a pretty heavy history in it. And the whole world is a post-apocalyptic world that you kind of see at the beginning, but the implications of why it's a post-apocalyptic world come out, and like I said, comes out as kind of cosmic horror genre creatures being major villains or major plot points in the show, as well as getting some pretty heavy existential questions, and then suddenly the silly villain of the show becomes a tragic character who shares a very sad backstory with another one of the characters that you thought was just kind of,
There.
Well, no, she was more than just there, but you.
Oh, I was talking about the penguin.
Oh, yeah, no, I was talking about Marceline.
Yeah, it's because from what I've understood, like the writers didn't have their ending in mind when they started the show. So
that's pretty obvious. Like the first season, like you said, is very episodic. In the second season, you start to see things developing. But there's also things that were always there that were a little bit odd that they kind of worked into the story to make it a little more interesting, I guess.
Yeah, no, I understand that when they make callbacks to previous episodes, they will take like tiny details that were in one episode, and then they'll make it a huge focus, or they'll tie things in that were previously introduced to like tell a new story or to flesh something that was kind of barely explained before. And that tells me that the writers must have been like fans of the show. Like they must have really they must have really enjoyed like telling these stories.
Yeah, I think that's pretty, not just that, but retelling them too, and going through all the different things. And I think some of them even, like, I don't know if this is true, but like I'm pretty sure at some point there is an important character who is a snail. But he appears in, I think, every episode in the first season at some point, just waving at the camera. And then upon rewatching, you notice this character every time that he's there, and you're like, he's there again, because later on he becomes quite intrinsically linked to one of the main villains of the entire show.
Apparently one of Pendleton Ward's largest inspirations for creating Adventure Time were his own experiences doing improvised D&D games.
Yeah, I can see that. And just making up things. And I think that is something that does happen in Dungeons and Dragons, even on some of the more well-known things like Critical Role, is like you have a general idea of what's happening, and then you put your characters in it, and then you start linking things together that maybe you didn't originally think would be linked, but you're like, no, this makes a better story. And I think that is something that Adventure Time kind of has. It's like it keeps adding layers. The more you it does somewhat feel like that like the more you live with these characters, the more you learn about them, which is partially adding depth to the show, but also probably mostly the writers realizing the potential that these characters always had and working with it. Feeling almost, the characters feel almost like the author, or not the author, but the writers were kind of discovering them. And not, but you talked about D&D. It is something that happens in Dungeons and Dragons. You start playing a character enough, you get to know him better and get to tell his story better. And I feel like that's part of what was happening there. Like, not just with the characters, but with the world. The more they had it, the more they fleshed it out.
Yeah, I mean, if you try and watch Adventure Time without any, like, you're just watching for the first time, it feels so random. Like, there's a rainicorn that is like a unicorn horse rainbow thing that, for whatever reason, she speaks Korean, and that's just how she talks. Like you said, there's a dog that can shapeshift. There's a human being that wears like a bunny hat, and you just kind of have to accept all this off the hop. Like, they don't explain any of it, and most of it's all explained later.
To come back to something, I don't think this is enough of a spoiler to put a spoiler warning on it, but like the fact that the rainicorn ends up getting married to the dog, and then later on you discover there was a dog rainicorn war, that definitely feels like something like, these two characters are, in love. The DM just throws in random backstory to be like, but it was a forbidden love, and that's actually in the episode where you find out about it. It does feel like it was just thrown in there to be a forbidden love.
Yeah, and to its credit, like, I've heard people describe it as organized chaos. Even though everything seems so random, it's somehow it somehow makes sense within the world they've created for the show.
Yeah, and that's, credit to them. They worked hard to make it more coherent and to make it kind of work in its own way.
And like, just to give an example of the weirdness of this, it's like, this is a world where there are 4 elements, and it's like, yeah, okay, how many times have you heard that before? But it's like, no, this time it's fire. Okay, yeah, there's always fire. Ice, okay, sure. Sometimes it's water, but ice, that makes sense. And then you have candy is one of the elements. And then what's the fourth one? Like goo?
It's slime. Slime
Slime.
Princess is one of the elementals.
And you're just like, okay, well, that's weird. Like, you don't usually hear candy and slime in the same categories as fire and ice, but it's just one of the kind of quirky things that certainly makes this show unique because, again, you don't hear much of that in in other TV shows.
No, and it's this weird thing where it takes that weirdness, but then it just goes with it. Like it becomes a pretty important plot point. For example, that Flame Princess and Princess Bubblegum are elementals and are kind of on a similar level of power because of that. And that ends up playing into why they don't trust each other and why they don't play well together, and why also when the elementals get their powers back, that comes back. Like their personality dynamics changes and is like, oh, yeah, no, this is a thing. But also, like, the personality they develop means that they react in very different ways to discovering that.
Yeah, I was honestly impressed watching the kind of timeline video because I'm like, wow, this is a very intricate story. And watching one person not in the same video talk about the show, they emphasize that the stories that happened later on really pulled from all kinds of different facets of the earlier episodes, which, like, to be honest, if it's a show meant for kids, you don't have to work that hard to have everything connect together because kids don't pay attention to the plot details all that well. But it just shows, again, the level of care they put into writing it. Or the like you say, like the DM kind of elements where they just were like, oh, like, how can we, like, add to what we've already created.
Yeah, and what I think is also where the um where the Dungeons and Dragon aspect of it too kind of comes is in the whole the way that they bring things together is usually made with character development in mind rather than plot development. I mean, let's be honest, and again, the plot is a lot less of a plot and more akin to, overarching quests. There's a few things that are happening, but most of the time you're just kind of following what's happening, like with a specific character.
But again, that really makes me think of Dungeons and Dragons because the world in which it takes place has so much going on in it that often just draws focus, like the setting and like how the characters interact with the setting. And then the other focus is the characters and the unique dynamic of, like, oh, we have this party of all these random creatures that have these different abilities and how do they play off of each other. And I don't know if, like, they should have, like, given some money to the people in Dungeons and Dragons for
Don't directly steal most of the things, but it also makes this, especially in later season, makes it so that you do start having episodes that have neither Jake nor Finn in them at all. And in fact, some of them are arguably better episodes because they are going through, like, yeah, we've got, like, the big quest that Finn and Jake are having in the world, but then what are the repercussions with, like, smaller people? And you do actually have this pretty common theme of, like, this minor character holding a grudge against one of the main characters because of something they did.
Now, I heard one person in a YouTube video complain about that they're like, it gets to a point later on where in their opinion, too much focus was spent on all these random side characters instead of with our main characters.
I don't think so personally, but because I don't think you ever lost the feel of the show just because Jake and Finn weren't directly on screen. I think it was fleshing out the world, and like I'll agree that the direction of the show changed, definitely. And part of that was having going from something more based around the adventures of this, young boy and his dog to the discovery of this world. Because I think by the time you get to the fourth season onwards, it's a lot more about the world than the characters. The characters are still important. They're still the central and emotional core of the stories that happen and of the episodes, but the show has become more about the world.
Yeah, so Pendleton Ward, who was the creator of Adventure Time, was involved in a significant way for the first 4 to 5 years of the show. But apparently he felt burnt out and he just decided to like remove himself from. Apparently he was still involved in some ways, but it was not his baby anymore. And again, this retrospective I watched, he didn't say this explicitly, but he was basically saying that him stepping out of the leadership position is one of the reasons why the show dropped in quality. And in his opinion, that it dropped in quality significantly in the latter half of its run.
I think
tied to that is that
that.
around the same time, a lot of the people working on the show ended up launching their own TV shows. Like you mentioned, Steven Universe. Like the people involved with creating Steven Universe were working on Adventure Time until Steven Universe started, and then they kind of split off
Yeah,
and went
and you also
their own way.
notice
So
there's a lot less music in Adventure Time after the guys who went to go Steven Universe left, and Steven Universe is all about the songs.
yeah, Rebecca Sugar especially is like the main creator of Steven Universe, and she was apparently like they brought her back for like the series finale to do another song of Adventure Time because their music impacted, I guess, the early parts of the show so much. But I find this element interesting because on one hand, we've talked before on this podcast about TV shows and movie franchises where like the original creator, leaves and then there's a drop in quality because that original person isn't there anymore. We've also talked about occasions where a brain drain occurs where you have a lot of talented people working on one thing and then the success of the thing leads to other things being made, and that means that people essentially are being like, instead of having all your best people in one room, they're now working like 3 or 4 other rooms. I couldn't help but think of the Arrowverse and how, all the great people working on just Arrow initially, and then the Flash came as a spinoff, and all of a sudden some of the people went to work on that, and then all the other spinoffs came from that, and ultimately Arrow as the original show suffered because even though obviously it got new people in there, it just didn't have the same magic anymore. And I wonder, you're a fan of the show. Would you say something similar happened with Adventure Time?
Yes and no. Like, as I said, the show changed its direction, but I don't think it ever lost itself to the point where like this is a completely different show. Like the last 2 seasons a little bit. Like they had the overarching storylines were a little stranger and they seemed like they were trying too hard to push certain elements of the character development. Specifically of Finn and his relationship with his parents. And it also like there was like the last season had mini arcs that were very specific, and it seemed like they were trying to finish things, and some of it resulted in, I guess, a fall in quality somewhat, but I think that some of it also just pulled into the world a lot of things that I think were really good. And it's one of those things. I think that generally, yes, maybe the quality and the direction of the show definitely shifted. Might have gotten a little worse at some times, but I don't think it's fair to say that it just straight up became bad or started getting worse. I think some things suffered, some things refocused. And
So it's not Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it's not. No. The last 2 seasons of Adventure Time are not the last 2 seasons of Game of Thrones. I think they're weaker, and they were trying to overreach for some of the things, and some of the storylines I feel normally would have taken 3 to 4 seasons to get to the point they got within one in earlier Adventure Time, because it was a much more meandering show. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, that the entire show is bad because of it. I do, like, I was a little bit disappointed in the finale somewhat, but not entirely. Like, it still closed off well, and it's still, some of my favorite episodes are still from the last couple of seasons, and in particular one that revolves almost completely around Lemon Grab, who, you know, is the greatest character ever created in animation. Not quite, but, you know, one of the best voice acting performances of the last century. If you know at all what he sounds like, you know what I mean and how sarcastic I'm being right now. But yeah, I don't know. I understand people who say that it got worse, but I think it just shifted its focus, and I don't think it was necessarily worse for it. But some of the things started getting different. But I also think that if you compare the first season, where it was still trying to get its footing, I feel like some of those episodes and some of those storylines are definitely worse than some of the bad things that came at the end.
Now, when I was watching the timeline video and they're explaining all these events that have happened in this universe, I was like, this feels like a comic book. There's time travel, there's a multiverse, there's clones.
Also, a lot of them have
there's
very minimal bearing on the actual plot of the show.
So was it just a waste of my time for a half hour to watch the timeline video?
But I feel like a lot of it were Easter eggs, right?
Oh, interesting.
That you might have not fully have gotten.
Right, because
Like,
I mentioned
heard them
Gunther
and
the
seen
Penguin,
it, but you didn't necessarily understand what they were.
Right, because if for what I understand about Gunther the Penguin's backstory, it really, like, you don't need to know that to appreciate his presence in the show. I guess it's like, it's helpful, I suppose, to have the additional information. Kind of like, I guess it comes back to D&D again. Like, to know a character's backstory is, I guess, helpful, but it doesn't necessarily like impact your experience with them. And it's like real people. Wow, this is just like the real world.
Yeah, but and I like also I feel like Gunther was definitely not planned out from the beginning to be, you know, a cosmic. Well, anyway, what he is, I don't know, but what is great is there is a callback to that, because the very first time that the Lord of basically the underworld, or equivalent of the underworld in this universe, met Gunther, he said, "You are the most extraordinarily evil creature I've ever seen. Offer your soul up to me." And then Gunther just quacks like a penguin, because penguins quack apparently. And then immediately the Lord's like, "No, I won't give you my soul." And then he immediately gets slapped by a penguin. And that, you know, that was just a silly gag the first time that happened. But because that happened, they're like, "Hey, remember that thing we did? Yeah, let's just make that canonically part of Gunther's backstory."
Now, from what I've observed, it seems like this show does character development really well, and that there's this kind of like, one of the themes of the show is that the characters are constantly evolving and like moving on to the next part of their journey. And
Except for Jake.
Really? But isn't there like a whole thing about him like embracing his like role as a parent and discovering his own lineage that kind of plays into the show towards the
I
end?
mean, somewhat, but he kind of reverts back to his infantile self pretty quickly.
Oh.
I mean, a little bit more in the later seasons, when his lineage more so than his parenthood. His parenthood makes minor changes that kind of influence him. His lineage makes a little bit more of a change, but he is definitely much more of your stereotypical, you know, sitcom character that resets at the end of every episode.
Your Kramers.
Yeah, like, not completely, but more so than most other people in the series. Like, to the point where you do notice there is a distinct difference in the amount he changes compared to other people. But that's also partially because he technically is a fully fledged adult at the beginning of the show. He just doesn't act like it, because he's a dog, so he ages quicker.
So, In some respect, you could say this is the story of a boy and his dog, because the two main characters are a human boy, and he's living in a world of like non-human creatures initially. Like it seems like he's the only human on in the land at the time, and then this dog that can shapeshift. And I always wondered why he wore that white hat, and I understand there's an explanation for it, and it eventually makes sense, but it struck me as very odd
I mean, it
initially.
somewhat makes sense. Even the explanation of it is a little bit of a stretch.
I guess it comes back to D&D and like, oh, like I want to have my guy wear this accessory that will be fun and help him stand out.
But I think also just generally character design, like you make strong character choices, like strong character design choices, and then later on you end up justifying it, but you don't necessarily have to either. But sometimes you do, and like sometimes it's like this character has scars, that's cool, and then later on you're like, huh, maybe I should figure out how they got that scar. Oh, it can play into his backstory, and it can play into this thing I put in.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I'm like, would I actually enjoy this show? Part of me thinks I might, but then based on the random clips I've seen, like there was one thing I saw about Finn needing to go to the dentist, and it just turns in this whole thing where he has to go see this ant army, and I was like, this seems like it's just randomness and it's just kind of descending into further.
If you've seen the episode, you'd know you're not supposed to talk about it.
Oh.
No, sorry. It's just within the episode, you're never supposed to mention that dentist is ants.
Oh, okay. Actually, I do remember that line now, but I was just like, where is this going? This is like, it just felt. I don't know if I can appreciate the randomness of it.
I think because of the way it is structured, it's a very different kind of it's not the kind of random where you can jump into a random episode and be like, oh, let's see this, because especially in the later time there's so many callbacks. Like in the dentist episode, if you don't remember who Tiffany is or where they came from, then most of the episode makes very little sense. The dentist thing still doesn't make sense, but other characters who show up do.
So based on what you know of me, do you think if I like gave this show a fair shake and started watching it from the beginning, I would enjoy it?
I think you would enjoy it. I don't know if you would necessarily feel that the investment necessary to watch all of it would be worth it, but I think you would enjoy it.
Because, like, full disclosure, listeners, I have started watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and I do enjoy it. And that is, as random and silly as I would imagine Adventure Time is. So I'm like, maybe if I could enjoy the randomness of JoJo's, maybe I could enjoy the randomness of this. I don't know.
JoJo's is in a different kind of league, though. Well, not a different kind of league for randomness. JoJo's is just a different type of random. But I think that Adventure Time still is an enjoyable kind of, methodic madness.
Yeah, I was surprised to see the number of video essays there are on YouTube about Adventure Time and people sharing their experience with it and like kind of dissecting elements of the series. So while I might observe it as just totally random nonsense, to no offense to anybody, there seem to be people who can get a lot out of it and like really, and who knows again how much of this was intentionally put there by the writers and producers versus just it's art, so people are interpreting it.
I think a lot of it was like intentional in the sense, and this is another thing why I said like I don't just think it influenced things like Steven Universe and like I mentioned Steven Universe and Rick and Morty specifically because there's something about those shows that explores more complex themes simply, like and more or less subtly. I mean, Steven Universe is not very subtle in any way, shape, or form, but it's still a simplified version or analogy of what it's trying to convey. And it's still putting it at a level that people can understand. And I think that Adventure Time very often is asking very severe existential questions, but in a way that is accessible. But also, it has this thing where it usually will get answered from the point of view of Finn, who is a very simple, human. A YouTuber I like describes him as the only truly lawful good character ever created. But just because he answers it that way doesn't mean you as a part of the audience will answer it that way. And I feel like that's one of the things, is that a lot of the questions that are put forth, or a lot of the themes that appear, even though they are resolved in a childish way because of the characters around it, they still beg questions that are on a deeper level. Like even just the idea of the one versus the many, or does the sacrificing the one to save the many. There's an entire episode about that, and you get like 3 different points of view of it, and it's played off pretty more or less funny and a little bit kooky and spooky. But in the end, what happens in the episode is that the most individualistic person in existence destroys an entire collective of heroes that are supposed to prevent the end of the world. But you can't, and it was done very quickly and very abruptly, and you expected it to happen that way because Lemongrab is the most selfish person that exists. But at the same time, you still question it. What would you have done? And would it be worth completely losing yourself in order to potentially in the future prevent a great evil?
So this show did end in 2018, but it has kind of come back in a way through the HBO Max streaming service, because naturally they needed content to have available exclusively on the service at launch. So among the things that were announced were that they were going to do a series of shorts in the Adventure Time universe called Distant Lands, which I know is like part of the theme song for the show.
I think it happens post Adventure Time, though, right? It's just Adventures in Ooh after the
Correct. Yeah, it's like a sequel. And at this point, I think they've released like 4 of them. Like one just recently came out like in the past month. Have you had a chance to watch anything? I guess you can't because you don't have HBO Max.
I can't, and I don't know that I want to. I'm always skeptical about these things, and even when they work, I'm not sure that I necessarily want to see them.
You mean like revivals of shows that have ended?
Especially something that I had a pretty big involvement in. I find it's better for me if I take a little bit of a step back before going into it. And even there,
it hasn't even been, it's only been a few years since the show ended, so you would think that like all the people who worked on it are still around, and all the actors are obviously still around.
I mean, I've had time to rewatch it once since it ended. I don't know. I think it was ending. The show was ending when Mjolnir and I started watching it together, or it was shortly after the last season had finished. But there are very few series that I actually have actively followed till their end. And I feel like those are things I really don't want to touch, at least for a while. Like, the other thing being, there's a manga called Billy Bat by Naoki Urasawa, and I actively followed it until it ended. Like, I almost did the same with Bleach and Naruto, but then I quit because it got bad by then before it was done, and I've since gone back to reread it till the end, but like Adventure Time and Billy Bat, I followed until the end. Like, I took a little bit of time off of Adventure Time, but I still finished it relatively quickly, mostly because I have a bunch of friends who also watched it through and loved it. But it's hard for me to want to go into something because, yes, the world was a big part of what was interesting, and having different adventures in the world would be nice. But I think it has like the Korra problem, where it's like, but if none of the characters I like from the original are there, even if it's the same world, why would I watch it?
Yeah, so what I understand about the series finale is that it's kind of bookended by these characters who are like in the future learning about the characters from Adventure Time. And so like the main obviously plot in the middle is like the final big adventure, and then it kind of ends with like, yeah, and their lives continue on after that. And I suppose like an adventure series like this that is like, again, based like on the idea of playing D&D, is that it really is probably very hard to like do an ending for these characters because there's just always another adventure for them to go on. So
especially considering the main character was what, 14 by the end of the show.
Yeah. So would you rather, it's like, if I'm hearing you say about the core problem, would you rather this sequel that's on HBO Max be about like a different set of characters and so you're less incentivized to watch it all together? Or would you rather it be what it is? And in fact, it's just like more adventures with the characters that you journeyed with.
I think it's just, especially in this case, because the characters, we did journey with them. It feels like making a bunch of shorts just doesn't have the same feeling. Like, and that's another thing about Adventure Time. I guess we didn't really talk about it, but like, it feels the closest thing to a long-running anime or manga series because it was pretty long and it did keep the same characters throughout, and they did have an evolution, which is something you don't get a lot with TV series, especially children TV series. Like, yes, Avatar had that, but you know, the entirety of Avatar happens within a year. Like, it's not that much time you spend with them. Whereas this, not only did the series last several years, while it was airing in universe, several years went by.
Yeah, apparently, like, you know, they actually cast a relatively young actor, Jeremy Shada, to play the main character, Finn. And of course, he hits puberty, his voice cracks, he sounds different. And normally in a show like this, they would just recast and, you know, keep the character the same age. But I guess they aged the character up because they wanted to keep him playing the part. And like, that's a nice touch.
Yeah, and it's part. I think that also is part of why a lot of people do associate or very strongly with some of the characters, and with Finn particularly, because you do see him growing up and going through, you know, childish things, but also weird puberty things too. Like, at some point, he's just depressed, and his solution is try to make out with people, and you know, try to see if that'll make him feel better.
This is starting to sound like Harry Potter.
Was Harry Potter randomly making out with people?
No, but like in the sense that, like, you know, you meet him as a child and you journey with him as he grows up.
Yeah.
And so you like, yeah, I don't think Harry Potter ever tried solving his problems by making out with people. Unless that was in like a secret chapter of the books. But yeah, it's, and this is why I have a hard time like giving any kind of final thoughts, because I'm like, well, maybe I would like this, maybe I wouldn't. I'm certainly glad it exists because, you know, beyond my limited exposure to it, it certainly has a fandom, and, you know, I can always count on at least a couple people at cons dressing up as Adventure Time characters. I can always count on the artist alleys to have lots of Adventure Time artwork because, you know, it is very creative, it is very imaginative, and it has connected with a lot of people. And, you know, a lot of the costumes are kind of simple to do, so it's like people love dressing up as the characters. And I'm like, that is a success in and like that. I don't know what else to say. Like that is good.
Yeah, and I think also it avoided, not completely, but it avoided largely the toxic fandom problem. Like, most Adventure Time fans are fans of it because it's good, lighthearted fun. Not, and even those who like the intensity of the backstories and the world it created, I don't think would go to the level of saying this is so genius. You know, like the Rick and Morty approach of you need a 200 IQ to appreciate this show, but enough that it's like, no, there is more to this than meets the eye.
So it's a Transformers series, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Well, beef pork ribs, maybe it'll be hard for you because you are so attached to it, but what would you give this as a back cookie rating?
I would give this I would give the show as a whole a 3.8 out of 4 bat cookies. At its best, it is definitely a 4. And I think at its worst, it's still a solid 3.4 at least. I think even the worst episode of Adventure Time I would still rate at a 3.4.
Okay, wow. Well, I will withhold rating it because I feel like I don't know enough about it to have an opinion. But I'm happy to say whatever you've said as the official ranking of the podcast. And if you live in the United States and you're listening to this, the whole series is available on HBO Max plus the new episodes they're putting out, so feel free to binge it. If you live everywhere else, maybe it's on a service where you are. I know in Canada it's not on any of the streaming services that are like mainstream, I guess. So if you're a fan of the series, I guess support the official release and buy it on DVD, Blu-ray, digital.
BMO, execute song structure alpha. Adventure Time on Blu-ray and also DVD. Complete season 3 is for you and looks like me. My favorite. 26 episodes and 26 commentaries.
Kicking.
Creator interviews, plus my arms and legs attached to my body. It's weird.
It's the complete Adventure Time Season 3 Blu-ray and DVD. Own it now.
So that you can check it out, because at this point it has been off the air for a few years. Like I said, the Distant Land specials are airing, but kind of like every 4 or 5 months.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
Well, Beef Fork Ribs, we can pull something random out of the jar for next time. Have you warmed up to Cruella yet?
If you want to do it, I'll do it, but I have not warmed up to it.
What do you think I should do, Batjar? Well, in the next week, I am organizing a bachelor party for somebody, so it would be helpful if we just had a thing that was kind of like a one and done sitting. So why not? We'll do Cruella. It had its first weekend at the box office, just the weekend that just passed, competing against A Quiet Place Part 2. And I think I saw that A Quiet Place Part 2 made more money, which makes sense because it was only available in theaters compared to the Cruella being available on Disney+. So who knows? If it's any good, who knows if it actually made more money in the long run. But if you have Disney+, you can get the movie for premium access and you can watch it at home. If you live somewhere where movie theaters are open, you lucky people, you can go see it in theaters, and hopefully you'll have done your homework, because that's our next episode. We're going to be talking about the new Disney movie, Cruella. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
What time is it?
Summertime. It's our vacation. Time is it. Time of our lives.
You did not just do that.
Yes.